All right, welcome to another great discussion on COVID-19 and learning schools thriving through the pandemic. Today I'm sitting here with Dr. Richard Kuder, founding lower school and middle school division head at Whittle School and Studios, Shenzhen campus. Welcome, Rich. How are you doing?
Doing great, Joe. Thanks for asking me to be here.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit more about your role as a founding division head at Whittle School and Studios, and a little bit more about Whittle School and Studios in general?
Yeah, sure. So Whittle is a new school that currently has two campuses. Our first one of our campuses is in Shenzhen, China, and the other is in Washington, D.C. Our ambition is to have multiple campuses throughout the world so that we can have a network of schools. We believe that a school that's connected in that way, that it gives students opportunities while they're in high school to attend other campuses, is a great way to build cultural competency and connect kids throughout the world. We also look at, for younger students, maybe some other experiences, maybe summer experiences, things like that, that would be able to take them to the different campuses that we've either established or are planning to establish. So we are a pre-K through currently 10 school, and we have over 750 students on our Shenzhen campus. We opened in September of 2019, and we've been working to keep ourselves keep education engaging through the COVID period. And now that we are back on campus, looking actually now in the middle of July to finish up for the second semester and have a little summer vacation.
Wow, quite the first year to open a school, right?
Yeah, I think our founder, Chris Whittle, said that there'll be some bumps in the road over the course of the year. I don't think we quite anticipated that it would be these. Maybe COVID-19 is a pothole, but you can learn. We've certainly learned a lot, and and I think as a startup, part of that DNA is your ability to be nimble and your ability to transition and move, and you attract some excellent talent. And I think throughout our initial year, our inaugural year, actually, I think that talent has really come to really mean a lot to me as an administrator and a leader, because there's just so many pieces that need to be worked on and managed in a brand new school. And COVID has just added, just an incredible ripple to all that.
Yeah, I'm sure it has for everyone, and I'm sure it's been a really emotional experience for you, personally and professionally. So I guess what is this all? Before we dive in to some of the more nuts and bolts of how Whittle responded, what has this been like for you? And how has the network accommodated your needs during this time? And I guess a little bit as a school leader, what are some of the things that you've done to attend to some more of the social and emotional aspects, for that talented faculty that you've recruited?
Yeah, no, great question. Just to provide a little context of the probably since January. I think it was around the 17th or so that our staff essentially left to go on a 2-week break to celebrate the Chinese New Year. I came home to the States. Teachers went around the world to their homes, and lots of our Chinese faculty obviously went to their own cities. And obviously a lot has changed. I'm still here in the States. But pretty soon after I had gotten back to the New York metropolitan area, it was pretty clear that things were going to change significantly, that we needed to sort of pivot and think about online learning and all of those different pieces. And I think it was it was interesting because now having, being later as it is in the year in July, as you watch the months go by and you see, okay, so this made its way, it was in China. It was hard to sort of connect while you're in the New York metropolitan area or in the States with exactly what was going on in China because we weren't experiencing it. And then when we did go through the lockdowns ourselves in the New York metropolitan area and indeed over the country, it was really an sort of a interesting experience, to sort of having lived it vicariously through our colleagues in China and then actually having to live it in reality the same way. And it is emotional. I mean, you have you worry about your staff, you worry about yourselves. I mean, thankfully we were all healthy. My family was all healthy, but you worry about staff members and you worry about their families, you worry about where they are connected. Lots of our teachers, as I said, were in lots of different places around the world, not home, either in the UK or in the US, but in places like Singapore and Bangkok and other cities in Asia where they may have gone to celebrate the New Year. And, many of them are still there. And for our students and our families, I think it was really clear to us early on as we started going through this process that this was going to be, we had to really attend to the social and emotional piece of our students and our families because literally they were in lockdown. We began our online program, I think about the 3rd of February. And that was at that point, it was sort of like working out the bugs in the system, trying to we were with an async program at the time. And then over the next 10 days or so, we our tech team in New York, where I was, and then folks in Shenzhen, we were working together to get asynchronous pieces up so that we could do live instruction with our teachers and our kids. And that actually helped a lot. That helped our kids and our families a lot, right? The fact that, school is a normal part of a student experience. And, for when kids saw their teachers, they lit up, right? Whether they were in China or in the States, it didn't matter then because it was just their teachers. We had the teachers work on pretty much the same work hours as what school in China was going to be. And that helped create those connections for the kids and their families, frankly. And no one knew what to expect. It was new for most everyone, even with previous experiences in China with things like SARS. Most of those families hadn't experienced that and certainly parents were maybe even children at the time when that occurred, and they didn't have their own families to think about.
Yeah, so it's you've made it through this semester attending to not only the social and emotional part of the faculty, of the staff, of the families, of the students, of all the members of the school community, while also pushing the learning while also still generating some strong results in terms of just student learning outcomes. I want to back up though to that that initial response, right? You said February 3rd. You said that it was a 2-week vacation over Chinese New Year, and then you launched an asynchronous learning program starting on February 3rd. Do you want to walk us through a little bit about, tell us a little bit more about what the school's initial response was to the pandemic at Whittle?
Yeah, so we started thinking about it. None of us knew at the time how long it was going to be, and so we laid out several scenarios. Some were short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Just thinking about that, and looking at, we used the analogy actually of a bridge, and we wanted the online community and the online work to bridge the connections that we had forged in the fall on campus. We wanted to bridge the relationships between the teachers and the students, a bridge for our students to connect with each other, and a bridge to build classroom community within the community, and continue, with bridges to our families, and keep them connected, as I said, with regard to just the normalcy of school. One of the ways that we did that was to make mandatory meetings with advisory meetings with kids, with students. And so this was actually something that Chris Whittle was mandatory in our design of the format and the platform, was that we had to we were creating spaces where our teachers and advisors would connect at least one time weekly with each student. And so we gradually built that in. So to start, it was a class, then it was small groups, and then it was, again, one-to-one, connecting with those things. And those came back, in our surveys with parents, those came back as very strong positives for our program. And that was one of the things that we decided that we needed to do, especially initially, was to get feedback. We had created all this, in a sense, in a vacuum, because we couldn't connect with anyone. We were all online. And so whenever we could, we sent out surveys to get feedback. Feedback about connectivity, feedback about the downloading, using our servers and the servers that were in China, feedback about the education program, feedback about the advisory program, and anything else that we could do. So especially in those early weeks, we were really focused in on getting that feedback and then turning that feedback into actionable changes to our program. We also wanted to make sure that we were not just doing academic things, because school is so much more than that, right? So how do we create social situations for kids? How do we do group work? How do we do how can we do physical education with our students? How can we do art and music? And again, started experimenting with some, I think ultimately pretty successful practices. Asynchronous, our physical education teachers created physical education videos. Some of the first ones that I think that were probably out there of, video routines. We have, pretty funny and really warm, heartwarming videos of like families exercising to our physical education teachers' videos, in Shenzhen on their deck or something like that, and then the art teachers putting a challenge out to the kids and, thinking about one of the encouragements that we had for our teachers was really for them to think about sort of like an Apollo 13 mission, right? Houston, we have a problem, and here's the stuff that we have to work with, So to give our teachers really an opportunity to say, like, what is at home that you can use to help, to help teach kids? Like, how can families contribute to that? So, we asked parents to partner with us, say, hey, look, do you have some seeds? Do you have some things when we were looking at science and plant growth? And, by and large, people had some of that stuff and they still could get some of those things through deliveries and some simple items like that. So we really partnered with them and said, how can we work this out? As opposed to a regular classroom where you might have all the materials in the classroom and there might be some, commonality to all of them. In fact, what happened on art projects and STEM projects became incredibly creative and thoughtful because they only could use what was available to them to show the nervous system or to build a cell or to, or to draw. We had students bake, right? We had students bake things that looked like their projects, so it was, and I think it connected families with each other too, I think the common experience that we've all probably had around the world is how connected we had to become to our families, just our own families, when you're inside and, your mobility is limited because you don't want to go outside or you can't go outside. You're home and you do things together and you get to know each other a little bit more than just your regular day-to-day kinds of experiences would have had in the past.
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, and we were, I'm just, I think thinking about how we began too, it was one of the things that was sort of a mixed blessing was this idea that everyone had to do everything online.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of actually the very positive things that we did and helped us get into that sort of area of flourishing and thriving was that we trained teachers online the way that the students would receive their online work, right? So our teachers did not have any training. Our teachers in Shenzhen did not have any training on some of the platforms that we were going to be asking them to use throughout the entire online learning experience. Everything they learned online. And that was, again, that was helpful in some ways, and really kind of springboarded. The need was obvious, right? And it kind of springboarded everyone ahead to say, oh, I have to learn this thing on Teams, or I have to learn this about our LMS, or I have to learn this, program or application in order to do this. And it was a matter of saying, everyone is starting somewhere, right? And we're going to have a growth mindset, and we're going to work on this. And no matter where you are, the goal is to improve, right? To get better day by day. And we saw that actually, week one, clunky for kids too. There was a learning curve for kids and families. Think about our youngest students of kindergarten age and first grade. They don't know these programs. Parents learned alongside their kids, and eventually the kids started doing it by themselves. So as the weeks went by, everyone got more proficient at what they were doing. And so many questions. And I think, I think one of the outcomes, I hope one of the outcomes of the whole experience is that, that crisis precipitated action and movement in a way that ordinarily it probably wouldn't have happened as easily. And I think it was really, and that's what crises do, right? They force us to rethink things and why we do things and what's important. And clearly this was something that helped us, introduce lots of different practices that would have taken a much longer amount of time and probably cost us a lot more money in the form of professional development and all kinds of things like that. So it was a really important part. And thinking about those pieces, how, because everything was online, and teachers are always amazing, right? They want success for each other. It's not, being a startup, it was always all hands on deck.
Yeah.
And whether that was September 1st or February 1st, right? It was all hands on deck all the time. And I think our teachers are exhausted. I think they need a vacation. But I think a lot of people expected that as a startup school. But that really meant that they really bonded and came together. Those experiences, those crises that we all go through, they can divide people or they can bring people together. And I think they really brought our staff together again, right? They sort of we were together, and it brought us even closer together because people wanted to help each other, right? So if I wasn't sure about how to use Buzz or this aspect on our LMS, someone would send me a quick video and say, this is how you do that, right? So there were teachers creating videos for other teachers and sending them and posting them. And we were curating those things, right? We were asking teachers to share those things with me and a few other people so that we could curate those practices and make them more diffuse.
Yeah, so much of what you said, resonates with me, and also I think with the experiences of other, other schools that have been able to thrive through this pandemic and to deliver a really meaningful program of learning. One of the things that you touched on here, and some other folks that I've spoken to talk about, is that in the past, the idea of the bridge or if the relationship between home and school was something that was always given lip service to, and maybe there were some events that you did to make public that relationship, but that this has forced folks to reckon that those previous conceptions that we had of home school relationship were insufficient. And this has pushed this has pushed the needle on getting feedback from home and from students about what learning is working for them and what kind of instruction is working for them. This has pushed that to a whole new level in creating a sort of a feedback loop, where teachers are trying things, they're communicating with parents, they're getting feedback, and really learning through what can be what's been a challenging time for everyone. So that's it's really interesting to hear you point that out.
It was a really honest feedback loop,
Yeah. Yeah, I love you talked about Apollo 13ing it.
Yeah. And we actually, just even about that feedback loop, we actually started thinking about, we actually created KPIs, right? So that we could measure how we were doing from week to week in the early stage. Because, and 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks into it, we stopped doing those because it wasn't as necessary in the same way. But early on, we had key progress indicators that were, well, let's keep hitting these, how are we doing in this? How are we doing in this? And so that we could just keep getting that feedback and improve that process. And that feedback from parents was number one, helpful and super positive. And I think, just universally, again, probably worldwide, I think that certainly there's a new appreciation for what teachers do on a daily basis. And thinking about how difficult it can be to work with not just one student, but classes of students. And I think, there was, I think that was also a positive and really thoughtful, feedback from our parents.
Yeah, and so you talked about, so in addition to that, getting all that great feedback, you talked about that everyone was hands on deck and they were willing to help each other and they were entering this with a growth mindset. Now, what are some of the other maybe capacities, dispositions, or mindsets that you think contributed to the school's success during this remote learning time?
I think we set up clear expectations from the beginning. And we continued to improve those expectations. It wasn't a loose framework, right? We were tight about what the expectations were, and as we went on, we loosened up on them. So we were tight about the fact that you needed to offer a certain amount of asynchronous instruction. We were tight about the fact that homework should be limited. That was not just Whittle's view. That was also the Nanshan Education Bureau's view, that there should be limited homework. And we were tight on, just saying that we wanted to resemble, while we know it's impossible to be exactly like school in person, we wanted as much as possible for the online school to reflect our distinctives as a school, and that was really important, right? Who we are in person and online should not be so dissimilar that they're unrecognizable, right? It should be Whittle Online, should be of a high quality, just like Whittle in person is a high quality. And I think that distinguished us in the field a little bit too, even as I look at my colleagues around the country, in various countries, there are some schools that just said, oh yeah, we're going to throw some packets online and the kids will just hand them in, or things like that. I mean, we were clear that was not something that was going to be acceptable to us as a leadership team. And I don't think that was something that our teachers really wanted to do much of. I mean, everyone did some of it because it was in some ways a good way to do some of the work, but we wanted the quality to be there. We were also successful because early on, and this is one of my beliefs, and also one of our head of school, Rhiannon Wilkinson, we believed in a distributed leadership model, right? Of course, in every organization, there's some hierarchy, but early on, we had established heads of grade, even for a new school, heads of grade, heads of department, people that we could point to. So we had a sifting and sorting system that we could work with and, you know, communicate with effectively over time, right? So that we could work with a group of people, those people could work with their teams, and people accepted those responsibilities. And I think that was a huge part of our overall success. And I would say that's true of our success in person, you know, the bricks and mortar version. And I think that's true of our online version. We've really put that to good use. You know, and we basically said how I refer to it as bounded autonomy, right? Here's the delimiters. Here's where you can work and have lots of autonomy. And within that, you know, you as I do say, you know, that's where you can ask for forgiveness and not permission, right? To go outside the box, ask for permission. But I do think that that was super helpful, you know, for our team and ultimately for the success of our enterprise.
Yeah. So, you know, you talk about that online school has to represent, you know, the Whittle Online has to look like Whittle in person. And, you know, earlier you talked about, you know, students, you know, finding seeds to grow and baking things to represent the nervous system. You know, that's a lot of that style of learning that was going on remotely. Is those types of learning experiences are something that Whittle aims to create in the classroom too. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that you know, like even just take something as simple as assessment. There's nothing simple about assessment, but just take the topic of assessment. You know, you can't give the same standard, you know, traditional assessments, right? You're looking for evidence of learning, right? And sure, a quiz or a test that a teacher created quiz or test can do that. But now you almost have to open yourself up to alternative ways of assessing what students know, right? So, you know, you're thinking about, you know, how best to give students opportunities to show what they know, for example, and to, you know, it might be a drawing, it might be a display, it might be an essay that they wrote, it might be a video that they make, it might be some other. We had kids, you know, write plays and perform shadow puppet plays to you know, as sort of like in their choice and voice of sort of a differentiated way of assessing, of, you know, of explaining a concept and talking about, you know, something in STEM. So it was really allowed our teachers to open up that door and sort of walk through and without too much, you know, really you know, I can't think of what is it? The mother of invention. What is
necessity is
the mother of invention, right? Yeah. So to a certain degree, that happened, right? That's part of the whole conversation. This had to happen. So, you know, you had to walk through it and start thinking about it. And that's again where our teachers, you know, spent a lot of time thinking about what they were doing vis-a-vis the different pieces of their work, right? So looking at it and saying, this is not how I would normally do it, but I'm open now to, you know, thinking about multiple ways of assessing students.
Yeah, and a packet of worksheets wasn't going to be acceptable because it wouldn't be acceptable, you know, in the four walls of a classroom. So why would it now be?
Right. It shouldn't be.
Yeah. Right. Sure. So, you know, it sounds like, you know, the transition to online learning, that a lot of the strengths that were present in the school and things that the school is aspiring to do in person, transferred online, and you know, but maybe the process of doing them was a little bit differently. I'm curious I want to dig a little bit deeper, and, you know, beyond assessment and pedagogy and curriculum, to really the purpose of your school, right? School, how has this either shined a spotlight on what the purpose of Whittle meant, or how does it shine a spotlight on the school's purpose to its to its community, or how has it maybe in some ways redefined the school's purpose to the community?
Yeah, let me see. Let me take a couple. Let me take a shot at that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that just looking at what is really one of our major distinctives as a school is the advisory program from an early age, from that grade 1. And so we made support of the students. And I think we were, I don't want to, we certainly weren't the first. I would never say that. But I think we were on the early part of this group of schools that said, that the kids are going to be, there's a traumatic element to this that we have to be really attuned to. And, again, if it's short term, everybody can get through a couple weeks, no problem, right? 3 months later, it's a whole different experience, right? It's anxiety producing. It's, people see and hear about loved ones passing away or being ill. There's worry. There's all that, and there's all of those things going through kids, through families, through there's lots of ways that that's being expressed. So I really think that helped emphasize for us the power and the need to be attuned to that in our campuses and in Shenzhen, specifically. I think the other piece that came out really in a really important way was the global nature of our schools. We were able instantly to leverage a global network. We were not just one site, right? So literally, I was in New York with a group of people, and we were designing and then passing along. We had a 24-hour work cycle, and then passing along work to our colleagues in Shenzhen who were picking up the ball and working on the next pieces and getting the next, making sure the capacity was there from bandwidth, and that the servers could be fast enough, and that all these different pieces were accessible, trying things out, making sure they would work. And so we were really able to leverage that. And then in turn, in March, we leveraged the same thing and the lessons that we learned in Shenzhen to push it over to our Washington, D.C. campus, who adopted and adapted the work that we had done in Shenzhen. And now they picked it up in March and went all the way through the end of June and made their own modifications. So those certainly were really important emphases. First of all, distinctives for us, and also the connectivity. We actually also had, speaking of the global piece, we actually also had classes connect. Not as much as we were like, because we were all struggling to do a bunch of things. But again, we said we had videos from our DC campus sent to kids in Shenzhen and so forth. So, just that you're connected in a way that ordinarily schools are not, was a really important part of I think our experience, through this.
Yeah. So you started by mentioning that this was that Whittle's a connected global campus, but it's in its first year, and so I'm sure this accelerated some of that connectivity. In a positive way, right? That it was it brought that to life on an accelerated timeline.
Sure. Yeah, and again, I think just as I said, our first year was all hands on deck. The same is true for Washington D.C. campus, right? All hands on deck. Everyone willing to help and assist. And that was, true. I have to say, our colleagues, when we were struggling to get things and working to get things up and running in Shenzhen, our DC colleagues were saying, what can we do? I was connecting them. I was connecting 5th grade teachers in Shenzhen with 5th grade teachers in DC. You know, do you have an online unit for this? What theme are you working on? You know, there were things like that that I was doing. And then of course, you know, and that just became a natural working relationship.
Yeah, it sounds, yeah, so again, just tapping into the, you know, the power of the network. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
You've talked about a lot of creative practices that have been happening during remote learning, some in Shenzhen, some in DC, some across the network. You know, are there any things that you're really particularly proud of, and that you might want to share with other schools or school leaders?
You know, sure. I think there are things that we're proud of. I think our situation in Shenzhen is a little bit different, only because there will be some practices that would be only in China, right? Programs or whatever they might be that our teachers did. I think one of the pieces that, you know, as I think about the online components, and certainly, you know, companies like RingCentral and Zoom were also responsive, right? Their tools were much more limited in this environment, right? The tools that you and I have available on this call, right, on this video call, are more substantive than they were 6 or 8 months ago when we used to use Zoom calls or RingCentral calls or whatever, right? RingCentral is powered by Zoom. And they got better at it too, which allowed us in turn to be more creative, right? So when we think about my online experiences prior to this, we're really being knowledgeable about, you know, online college classes and things like that. And they've really moved that needle pretty far. And so, you know, our teachers were able to take advantage of some of those practices. And when those things were added technically to the platform, like breakout rooms and polling and all of those different things that teachers could embrace as ways to connect kids and engage kids. I mean, that was a huge issue of initially, was how do I, you know, not just behavior, which was sort of an interesting one, right? We created online behavior, like netiquette, not just netiquette, like what to do online, but how do you behave when you're on the screen, you know, or do you put, you know, does your screen just go, you know, blank, or, you know, I only see up this far, right? We had kids, you know, and there were kids in middle school, for example, that, and this was actually an interesting one for us. So I'll go back to that one, but let me just add, the platform, as they expanded, you know, all of these different pieces also grew, and we began to utilize them more, right? From, again, teaching even like second graders to use the chat room to ask a question, right? Or raise their hand, or, you know, or to put them in work groups randomly or otherwise. You know, using an LMS for the youngest learners. I mean, LMSs are usually reserved for the oldest kids, right? But we used an LMS all the way down to, I think we actually got it down to second grade, students using it by themselves, because most people feel like it's too complicated, right? If it's not something super simple, and kids were able to navigate those things. And so we, you know, I was proud of the fact that we pushed our kids to that, and they accepted the challenge, and they really, I think we all saw the benefit of that. And so through the LMS, we could do other assessments, you know, with kids that would give us more feedback about their overall academic growth, just like we can for 11th and 12th graders. A really unusual story happened with some of our middle school kids. We talk about the social and emotional component for our, you know, for our students, and really the trauma, and I think that is the right word, the trauma that kids were going to. One of the speakers at one of the webinars that I attended said, I hate the word social distancing, because really what we want is physical distancing and social closeness, right? And we tried to do that for our students. And, you know, if you're a 14-year-old student, the last thing you want to do, and maybe this is true for me too, and maybe for you, the last thing I want to do is see my face for like an hour on a screen, right? And I get to look at everybody else. And kids became really self-conscious of this, like, because they're in that identity formation, right? My nose is too big, my eyes are weird, my hair is funky today, right? Like, or whatever, right? I don't like my chin, whatever it happens to be. I have acne or whatever.
Are you just describing me?
Not at all, Joseph, not at all. I'm, you know, but you can imagine they're kids, right? So they're all super self-conscious of how they look. And so you had kids with their hoodies on or hats, and it just became, and then you had blank screen, right? You had this, right? Or you know, and we wanted to see kids. Kids would put their names on. So actually one student actually wrote an app that he used to change so that you knew it was him. Like, you would know it was me by the way that my hair is parted, and you would see me, but the whole rest of the time it would be like not more than a silhouette, but like I forget what the word would be, like a foil representation, some type of like negative of my look, right? And so kids figured out, you know, like, okay, my teacher wants to see me, he or she wants to see that I'm engaged. I want to show them that I'm engaged, and yet I'm still really conscious, and we still have to work on this. And not every kid did this, but there were things that kids did that were really, really special when it came to making adaptations to online learning. You know, one of the practices that we started to for our teachers was, I think probably, maybe, what Mark Zuckerberg imagined when he created Facebook. Social media was supposed to bring everyone together. Social media was supposed to be the way that we could connect with each other, right? Facebook is named after all of those, you know, when I went to college, I literally got a Facebook, right? It had all the faces of all the freshmen in it, you know, or the first year students in it. And that's where the name actually came from. And it was supposed to be this thing that connected everyone. Well, it's done a lot more than connect. It's divided, it's become advertising, it's become all kinds of things, both positive and negative. And what we also endeavored to do was to really create the positive sides of what a social media could do. So we created some affinity groups for teachers, right? Teachers had, you know, we had like, hey, what did you cook today? You know, we talked with some people about this who are in the social media space, and said, like, you know, pets at Whittle, tell me, you know, like dog lovers and cat, you know, like there were all kinds of little things that we tried to do to connect our staff, because everyone's isolated, and they were isolated in different parts of the world. So I think that was a neat opportunity for us to sort of, again, think about how to use this online and social media space to connect people, educate and connect, you know, in really positive ways.
Yeah, it sounds like, you know, so many creative practices coming out of Whittle School and Studios. I'm sure that some of them, before all of this, as a school leader, you might have thought about a little bit differently. And so I'm curious, as a school leader, was there anything that that over the last 6 months that you've had to give yourself permission to do, or to allow others to do that maybe back in November 2019, you know, you might not have done, in terms of, it might be, you know, the way that assignments are handled, you know, anything from the nuts and bolts of school to some of the more social aspects that you've been describing.
Yeah, I think what we want to make sure that we're doing, and one of the lasting pieces, I hope, is leveraging the technology, leveraging, you know, the video and the LMSs and the other things that we did on Teams to enhance the learning experiences of our students, right? You went through all that pain and difficulty. You went through all that learning, and it would be a shame to let that fall by the wayside now that we're in person. there are ways to leverage those practices to enhance the learning, engagement, and experience of students through differentiation of work. For example, I talked about the LMS a little bit. For even younger students, not just for high school where LMSs are, and maybe middle school where LMSs are dominant. I mean, I talk to colleagues all around the world, and especially in the US, and their LMSs, everybody had an easier time in high school and middle school because LMSs, they use Google Classroom, they do a bunch of things like that. Very few schools are doing that work on the lower grades. And in some ways it's handicapped us. And elementary teachers already have, I think, a more challenging experience in most elementary schools, just because, at least in the primary grades, they're usually all teaching all subjects. So in addition to all of their subjects that they're preparing for, they're also expected to prepare, differentiated lessons with homework and assignments and reading and all of those kinds of things. And that is just an enormous job, an enormous task, an enormous responsibility. And if we can use the technology, now that we know it, if we can use these things to lighten that burden and give teachers the opportunity to do the things that they do best, which is when they're working directly with kids and interacting with students and assessing students and screening students and learning about what students' strengths and weaknesses are and figuring out the next thing that they need to, the next place that they need to go on their learning journey in a particular subject. I think that would be a huge, long-lasting change. Again, to think about the capabilities of our youngsters, or maybe even our youngest learners, and how we've really, we reserve those things for older students, but those things are equally beneficial for our youngest students, and also put tools in the hands of the teachers that make it even maybe more reachable.
Yeah, I think one of the last things that that anyone wants, well, that any innovative educators or schools that are pushing the envelope want to see is for things to go back to quote unquote normal, right? To have not learned anything from this, to not take this time and cast that forward into how we might redefine and reimagine learning, starting this fall and forward, would be a huge opportunity missed. And so, all of those things that you just mentioned, I think that's great. Being able, using the technology to make the learning more human is absolutely something that we hope to see stick beginning, from now, on into the future. Are there any other sorts of changes in Whittle that you hope to see stick when you return to campus? I guess you're already back on campus.
We're already back to campus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess when everyone is back to campus, including all this faculty and folks and students who are abroad, is there anything, what do you hope to see stick, even when you're able to have everyone in a classroom together?
Yeah, one thing certainly is, as a school, we're not a typical, we don't give students typical grades like A's, B's, and C's or percentages. We do, as I said before, have tests and quizzes. We believe in project-based learning and the importance of that, and sort of that, transferability of skills and things like that, which sometimes can be content agnostic. But I do think that, that our teachers are, and I hope we continue to embrace this, and have built up the habits. Charles Duhigg talks about, he's one of the New York Times writer who wrote the book Habit, that essentially we never lose those practices. We just sort of rewrite our neurons to new practices. And so I'm hoping that, even in something like assessment, that our teachers can look to how we can accept greater variety in the evidence of learning when our students are learning certain things. There still will be efficient ways to do things about, maybe memorizing timetables or, times tables or something like that. But there are other ways, and there are other ways that we can gain information about what students know, and how they're learning those things vis-a-vis what our initial project objectives were or our course objectives were. So I hope that's a lasting, outcome of this. And I think, I appreciate one of the things you said, and I've been thinking a lot about this, that we need to remember that we need to make sure that we're bringing the humanity back to education. Education is not something that we do to students, right? We're coming alongside them, right? As experts, as professionals in our field, we are creating pathways for them to learn the things that that will be relevant in their lives, right? In a structured, systematic, in a systematic way, a structure that might be different for every child, but there's a humanity there that we lose sometimes. We think it's about preparing, it's about results, and it's about test scores, and it's about other things. There are 6-year-old young people who are experiencing, so many things in their lives, regardless of COVID-19, right? That was a unique experience, but maybe that brings home to us the humanity, I think, that we always have to have as people, right? As human beings, to say, this was a special time, but there really is always a lot going on, right? In a young person's life, be they 6, be they 12, be they 17 or 53, there's always a lot going on. And we need to sort of think through what that means to us as educators.
Well, thank you so much, Rich, for bringing it home, to this being about what's going on in kids' lives, adults' lives, the lives of of people across the world, and and I, like you said, I hope that we're able to take this chance, this opportunity to rewrite some of our habits around schooling. The world has a lot to learn from the practices at Whittle School and Studios. So thank you very much for taking the time to share that and be a reflective practitioner. To talk about your experiences and the network's experiences, learning and thriving through the pandemic. So thank you very much, Rich.
You're welcome, Joseph. Great talking with you.
All right, take care.